County. The opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Hi, and welcome to Rogers TV's special COVID-19 programming. I'm David Shearman. My guests today are Alana Murray, the Director of Education of Bluewater District School Board, and Jan Johnstone, who is the Chair of the Bluewater District School Board. Now, I have to say, you and I, the three of us talked, I'm going to say probably a month or two ago, a couple of months ago, and I'll be honest with you, I wished you well in retirement, Alana. I did not expect to see you again, but the education system has changed so dramatically with so many nuances and new information and changes. We had to get you both back on to talk about it. So welcome to the both of you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Now, let's step back a little bit. I guess the last time we had talked, we were still there were still some labor issues which were being wrapped up, and then COVID-19 hit hard. What happened? Just briefly recount for us, Alana, what happened when the provincial orders came down?
So that was the Thursday before March break. And so Friday we spent all day trying to put together some communication and get that out so that everyone would know that as of effective March the 14th, Saturday, schools would be closed in the province of Ontario. Then we had March break, and we spent time looking at the messaging we were going to need to do with staff and the training we would need to do with staff in order to get them prepared to start a continuous learning program. So we spent a week or two after the March break putting that all together. We then initiated the opportunity for staff to go into the schools and get some of their teaching materials and equipment. We organized the distribution of additional technology to students and families who required that. We had to address special education specialized equipment needs as well and get that out there and distributed. In the meantime, we continued to do some professional learning with staff. The Ministry of Education was putting together modules and additional resources for staff to access in preparation to connect with their students. We had a reconnection plan per se, where the staff reached out to students and families to reconnect with them, see how they were doing. We prioritized student and staff well-being as our number one priority at the beginning of this process, and tried to carry that through all the planning that we did. Once the plans were up in place and teachers and students started to settle into some routines, the ministry also provided further clarification on the amount of instruction, the type of instruction, the focus, the foci, etc. And then things started to settle in. We still had to deal with some significant equity-related issues of access to technology and not necessarily the actual hardware, but the infrastructure within our communities that make it possible for students to do online learning. And we're still working through those pieces. So we had to develop other options for families if they were not able to get reliable connectivity and do online learning. So we put together hard copy materials and sent them out. And right now we switched gears substantially, and we are looking at to a time in the future when we will be reopening schools and getting students back into classrooms. And there are many complex issues related to that planning right now.
Jan, what was going on at the trustee level while all of this was going on? Obviously, you were, I'm presuming, in communication with Alana and with the staff, but in fact, there's still governance issues involved.
Well, that was exactly it. So basically, for the first few weeks, we decided that we weren't actually going to necessarily be involved, and then we decided we would have board meetings but the other thing is trustees had to then learn how to go online. So we actually went, okay, we're going to have a board meeting online, and we actually practiced doing that, and so that trustees could feel comfortable, being in a meeting online. And so I think for the most part, trustees have been successful, and I think as we've go further on this, that we're, for the most part, we're feeling really comfortable. I know that, and just a minute, Gord, you're in the video. Sorry, I had to put that out there. That is so real, and so trustees became a lot more comfortable. I can tell you myself, I've actually attended meetings with home and schools in my area, and also parent council. And I can tell you in those meetings that kids come on and they do all sorts of things, and that it's all a part of, you could basically be doing governance from home. And I think that was exactly it, that they realized that we needed to connect, and that we could actually do governance by staying at home, staying safe, but also then seeing what is going on and providing some different structures and pieces that we're responsible for.
Yeah, we've had the same experience here at Rogers TV. Fortunately, here at Studio 916, which is a remote location for Rogers, we don't have dogs and cats and spouses coming in and out. But then again, other people do. But the really interesting thing, and you did mention it, Alana, was the connectivity issues and infrastructure issues that we have in Grey County. I will tell you a true story, and I mentioned this before we went to air, Jen. Most of our guests have great internet connections. The people who don't, curiously, the one who probably has the worst is our MPP, Bill Walker. and he and I have joked about the Hepworth internet. But as he has said, this is a legitimate issue. It has drawn the government's attention to the huge need for infrastructure investment in rural communities. And yes, they are already moving forward faster than I believe they intended. So this is going to perhaps reflective of the big change in education. I've talked to teachers, and they are saying, hey, we miss our kids as much as the kids miss us.
Yeah.
And they did reach out to their students, both those who maybe didn't have connection, but I love the term the government is using, synchronous learning. It's a little odd, but I know what they mean. But basically, it's not replicating, but changing the whole instructional environment. And this going to have a huge impact on the education system going forward.
Yes, yeah. For sure.
So I think that when we're talking about that, is that during this time, it's actually created some major problems where, for some students, they weren't able to connect in real time at that time. And that was because in their home, and I'm thinking about young kids, if their parents were also working at home, because they need parental support to get online, or they only have, say, one device or whatever, that in fact, that time didn't work for them. And I think that going forward, we're going to have to look at some of those things. I mean, we're now kind of thinking about what the future is going to be like and what we're doing. I know, for example, when I was at this home and school meeting, they were talking about during the meeting that they actually had more parents attend the meeting. So yeah. So, and I think part of it is they want to know what's going on. They figure if they attend a home and school meeting, and it made it a little bit easier. But they talked about, in going forward, that they're going to hold both what I call a blended meeting. So for those who eventually, when we can maybe be together more physically, for those people, they're going to be coming in person, but for others who that might be more difficult for, is there going to, is do something what we're doing here. So I thought that was interesting that they were kind of picking up that maybe, that's, you could say in the future, what it's going to perhaps look like is that you're going to have what you call a blended model. And maybe Alana would want to talk about that more.
I think what we're doing right now is a perfect example of synchronous learning. It is in real time at a scheduled time that people can sit down together and engage face to face. And Jan's identified some of the challenges, not only for our families, but for our staff as well, because childcare has not been provided for teachers and education workers. And so they are trying to manage their own families and work from home and try to find the right blend of synchronous and asynchronous learning for kids and families, because many of our families are also sharing technology, and if the parents are working from home and the kids are trying to get to their schoolwork, I think we struck the right balance in Bluewater based on surveys that we've conducted with staff, parents, and students, and we will continue to look for ways where staff and students can connect in real time, but I think there are challenges related to the infrastructure in Grey County. I also wanted to just comment on the conversation with Jan earlier around electronic or online board meetings. What people don't realize is that the government actually had to change many regulations within the Education Act to permit some of these things to happen. And that takes time. That has to work its way through government. And so when Jan referenced that the trustees weren't actively engaged in the beginning, that only meant that they weren't doing the daily operations. But the trustee associations were working with the government to put together, to look at those regulatory changes that need to happen so that trustees could meet online, because under the Education Act, they're to meet in person. And at least the chair is supposed to be physically in the room.
With the director.
With the director. And since that couldn't happen. So these are some of the things that have slowed down the process. But really, it's phenomenal. In basically 10 weeks, we have reinvented the education system in Ontario, and kudos to everybody. I mean, the patience and understanding of families, the resilience of our students, the work that our staff have been doing, the training that they've been doing, because blended learning is the model of the future, and many of our staff might have been using a little bit of technology, but they weren't using a lot of it. And now they've had to set up their workspace in their own homes and deal with the challenges of trying to manage all of that. So kudos to everybody.
I'm just thinking back to other synchronous learning kind of models that would have existed in the past. And the one that popped into my mind was actually the School of the Air that was used in Australia and may still be used, for all I know, to educate children on remote ranges. And that kind of, which was synchronous learning using two-way shortwave radios. That's basically what we've done, but changed the technology. And I think that deserves, I don't know whether it deserves a look again, but there may be lessons from some of these other models that have been used over the years for child and adult learning.
Well, I think we're probably all of the same age range. And I remember in high school talking about these phone systems we were going to have that you would be able to see people at the other end of the phone. You wouldn't just hear them. And really, that's what we're trying to capitalize on. I think our staff, you mentioned it earlier, David, about that they really miss the kids. They miss that physical, being physically in the same room with kids and being able to guide them and support them. And so, at a minimum, being able to see each other, I think has been really helpful. This isn't only about education. This is also about mental health and, the isolation associated with some of the quarantining and being the limits placed on us. And, we've been cognizant of that from from the very beginning as well. And the more that we can connect, whether we are hearing each other or hearing and seeing each other, I think that's helpful for all of our mental well-being.
Yeah, I also think too that, and it's mainly because I've attended, it wasn't just not one school but another school where they basically had a Zoom type meeting. And what I was really hearing from, parents at these meetings and listening really closely is that they also have been doing their own, having to do education. Like, other words, I think that's part of the difference. And I'm now particularly talking about younger children, but they've had to learn these different systems, to connect. And that when a teacher is teaching in this regard, is that it's really just not that student, it's the student in their parent. I also realized too, in some different situations, that parents of children, even in high school, say particularly grade 9 or grade 10, to have a sense of what their student, their child is supposed to be doing, is they need to know. And so one of the things I heard, and I sent that information to Alana just recently, they talked about, can we kind of have one system? Other words, and it's just because, certain kids were doing certain things in classrooms, but as parents, if they have more than one child, all of a sudden they're having to connect and do various kinds of systems. And they were saying, can we streamline this a bit? So I just want to say for us is to recognize that it's just not the teacher and the students, but it's really, I think, a lot more parental involvement, and that we have to be thinking about it in that way.
I was just thinking that the first time I ever encountered a television and a telephone combination was 1964, New York World's Fair, and AT&T actually had a video phone that they had invented, and the terminal was in Washington, D.C., but you could only call that terminal. So now the technology, the idea, it existed then, but we're in a very, very different world right now. I also want to move a little bit to the future, because Mr. Lecce announced or said yesterday that there would be report cards. What will they look like going forward for this year?
So they'll look pretty much the same as they would any other year. The template will look the same. The content will be different. So the format will be familiar, but the content will be different. So the content will be based on the work that students have done. This has just been finalized now provincially as well. Some clarification has come forth yesterday. So for elementary students, the comments and the grades will be based on the work students have completed since the beginning of February and the middle of March. And that is typical of what's referred to as a second term report card in elementary, and that is no different than it's ever been. But what they will also do is include comments that are related specific to this situation. So if a student was missing a particular, or students were missing a particular unit or strand in the curriculum, that will be noted because of the current situation. In terms of, and what we've asked staff to consider is to provide as much information as they see through their own professional judgment that parents would need to understand where their children are at the end of this school year, and to frame that in whatever way makes sense in language that is clear and plain for parents to understand. So that's what we've asked them to do. In terms of secondary, it will be based on their second semester credits, and again based on the beginning of February to the middle of March. Students can improve their grade after that point, but they can't have any grade that's lower than where they were on March the 13th. There again, the comments would be aligned with providing parents with a good indication of their progress through that credit. We know that some students will not have completed the work prior to March the 13th and may not have fully engaged in the continuous learning program. So the ministry has provided some language and comments that we are to use on those report cards to reflect that situation. So parents will see, mostly the format will look exactly the same as they've seen before. The comments will reflect the unique circumstances of the COVID situation, and they will get some clear comments about if students haven't completed the work.
So they will get a report card with appropriate remarks. And will this affect those who are in grade 12 who want to go on to post-secondary education?
So graduating students, we've dealt with that quite substantially already. So again, they're in the same situation. It's really just second semester credits and requirements for graduation. And so their mark will be their mark as of the 13th of March or higher, if they've completed additional work and it's in the best interest of the student, and they work to get a higher grade, they will have that higher grade. The marks their progress prior to March 13th, as well as a summary of their progress until the end of April, was already uploaded to colleges and universities if those students had applied to post-secondary. So the colleges and universities have that information, and the government worked with the colleges and universities and assured us that they would be considering scholarships and bursaries in the same way as they have, based on the information that's been provided. And some of the graduation requirements were actually waived for graduating students. So the literacy requirement, if it had not been completed, it was waived, and also if their community involvement hours were not completed, they were waived as well, just for this graduating class.
Sounds like most of the bases have been well covered going forward.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it was very high on the list of priorities to ensure that graduating students would not be disadvantaged.
Great.
Yeah.
And now, over the summer, there's been remarks about, well, there'll be changes to the school system, to the school structure. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So,
or is that not clear yet?
No, we're definitely thinking about it for sure. All the school boards, the directors, we speak every week. We speak with the ministry once a week, and we speak as groups of directors once or twice a week. And we're sharing some of these reopening plans and ideas. But most of us are monitoring also what's going on in the other provinces, and I know that the government of Ontario is also monitoring, specifically BC and Quebec right now, because they have return to school plans that are being implemented prior to September. So out of that, what we've learned is that there's an awful lot of demand for plexiglass right now. And so we have actually initiated through our plant services department a review of our office spaces to start with, because we know we are going to have to install some kind of barrier between the staff and students and people coming into the schools. And so that is already in place. We also, based on the experiences in other provinces, know that it's a phased-in process, usually starting with elementary, younger students first, and that we are likely going to have to reduce the number of students per classroom space, as well as reduce the number of students on buses to transport them to the school. So we're looking at what those spaces look like and how to space out the desks. That certainly has implications for scheduling schedules for students and staff, as well as probably will require additional staff, additional teaching staff. And so there's some discussion about the use of supply teachers and other qualified individuals to look at that. But we are going to have to see what that looks like, and depending on the medical advice that's given to the government. So a lot of it is really about some of those structures in classrooms, and then the other big one is the cleaning protocols that have to be put in place. Now, most boards use what's referred to as lean purchasing strategies, which means we buy just enough to use in real time, and we have easy supply options. So not all boards were sitting with lots of supplies on hand. So we'll have to take a look at that inventory, and the government is actually monitoring that on a weekly basis. Also, some boards gave away some of their protective equipment for the healthcare system, so we have to restock. So there's actually a consortium at the provincial level that's looking at all of those things and providing options for boards. So we will have to restock those things, and then the other big piece is there's been a real limitation to the full programming for students in other provinces. They have not been outside in their playgrounds. They've not been in their gymnasiums or any of the other large congregated spaces, and so that's impacts on arts programs like music, phys ed, recess, and all those things. So we're monitoring what that might look like. So children are generally staying in one classroom for most of the day, and the number of adults that they're in contact with is much more limited. So these are just all the things that we're observing and learning about, and we'll have to see how successful those strategies are. We're starting to see some of the numbers in Ontario go up in terms of COVID cases, and so everybody's monitoring that really closely. But I imagine it will be a staggered entry, reduced class sizes. Transportation is a huge issue for us in terms of rural Ontario, and not only access to sufficient numbers of vehicles, but also access to sufficient numbers of drivers, and what that will look like. Drivers can't drive the bus and then clean the buses in the way that they will be required to clean them. That will require additional support. So I imagine our operators and our service providers are looking at some of the strategies that, like the TTC or other, bus companies are using for hygienic cleaning and things like that. So there's a lot in play right now, without any final plans yet. So.
It sounds like we're really in a sea change for the education system, that there is, it's governance perhaps on one hand, but also for the very practical things like busing, like classrooms. It's going to be absolutely fascinating to watch.
It'll be a long process.
I would think.
Yeah.
I would think.
So I know that when we had the Ontario Public School Board, and I'm on the director, and Minister Lecce came on, and there were some various questions that went to the minister, and one of them was related to, because if we are going to reduce the number of students in a classroom, is that for school buildings who just say where before it was all about if you're not using that space, you close that space off. And one of the things we were asking him is to consider, we need to open that space, so it was, when we were really concerned about budgeting, and we haven't got our grants for student needs yet, but we recognize that there's going to be, need for additional kinds of monies. So it's...
Jen, I hate to cut you off, but I'm getting a message from my producer. We got to go.
Okay.
So, okay. I want to thank you both for the really fascinating conversation. And Alana, best wishes in retirement.
Yeah.
Jen,
thanks very
we'll
much,
talk
David.
to you again.
Okay.
Thank you both for being a part of this Rogers Special COVID-19 program. I'm David Shearman. We'll talk again.